Television, window to the world. The story of television begins in an unlikely way. The year was 1922. Ford's Model T sold faster than the factory could turn them out. Cities were buzzing with the newfound power of electricity. Early technology was transforming the landscape. Electricity was a revolution in science that had begun over 100 years before. In the early 1800s, Europeans like George Ohm and Heinrich Hertz, formerly trained scientists, slowly uncovered one of nature's most complex mysteries, electricity. In America, men like Alexander Graham Bell and Thomas Edison turned electrical theory into mechanical reality. Inventions like the phonograph and the motion picture camera were the result of a little science and a lot of ingenuity. Men without formal training were making extraordinary breakthroughs. It was into this exciting world of invention that a 14-year-old boy came along who would become critical to the development of television. On a remote farm in Beaver, Utah, a Mormon schoolboy dreamed of taking DeForest's work a step further. Philo Farnsworth had no formal training in the new field of electronics, but as a teenager, he was destined to change the 20th century. Young Farnsworth was determined to come up with an electronic tube of his own, one that would carry both sound and pictures. Reading scientific journals by candlelight, he worked late into the night in an attempt to decode the complex phenomenon of particle physics. At 14, the young genius was ready to share his idea. While the other kids brought cut and paste objects to show and tell, Farnsworth brought something else.
And he put some of the equations for it on the blackboard, and his professor said, his science professor said, "What's that?" And he said, "Well, it's a means of projecting television images over the radio."
The theory was so complex that his teacher sent Farnsworth to Brigham Young University to see if the boy was crazy or a genius. At the university, the scientists were astonished. Basic idea was that an image would be read by a lens and captured on a plate. The image on the plate would be scanned by a beam of lightning-fast electrons emanating from a cathode ray tube. Electrons would bounce back off the plate, representing light and dark areas of the image. The electrons in the tube would be converted into an electric impulse, which could then be sent to a transmitter and out over the airways. This image would, in turn, be carried to a receiver. The image, or signal, would be amplified and beamed onto the inside of the chemically treated tube, in much the same way it had been captured. This was the televised image. But television would take a long, difficult journey from the drawing board to the living room. Unfortunately, Philo Farnsworth would have to wait to prove his theory. After a year in college, his father's death forced him to drop out of school and seek work. It looked as though the young inventor would never get the opportunity to actually create his television. Across the country, a different kind of genius was about to embark on a path towards his career in television. David Sarnoff would do more than anyone else to shape the future of television. And considering where he started, it's remarkable that he ever got the chance. At 14, the young Russian immigrant wanted to escape the grinding poverty of New York's teeming Lower East Side. Forced to drop out of school and look for a job, a lucky twist of fate would alter Sarnoff's future. A wrong turn on the way to an interview landed him in the offices of American Marconi, the inventor of the wireless. Marconi needed a messenger and Sarnoff needed a job, but he got more than expected from the chance encounter.
And he said from the first day there was something almost hypnotic about wireless to him, because Marconi was his idol. He dressed the way Marconi dressed, used the cane that Marconi used, gloves, suits, things like that. He idolized it.
Sarnoff had an intuitive feeling for the new world of electronics. He wasn't an inventor, but he possessed his own unique gifts. And one of these gifts was a penchant for promotion. According to legend, on the night of April 15th, 1912, Sarnoff was manning the Marconi relay station in New York when he picked up an urgent message. A boat was sinking in the Atlantic. It was the Titanic. Sarnoff worked the wireless key for 3 straight nights, alerting other ships in the area. Years later, it was established that the story may have been partly myth. Nonetheless, Sarnoff repeated the story so often it gained currency and gained Sarnoff a reputation. As Sarnoff worked his way up the ranks at Marconi, more and more people began using the airwaves to send messages. The problem was that the space for sending signals was limited, which caused interference. The airwaves needed to be organized or chaos would result. So the government stepped in to solve the problem. Secretary of the Navy Franklin D. Roosevelt gathered all the companies with a stake in this new phenomenon called wireless. Together they formed a trust called RCA. The idea was to put all of broadcasting's eggs in one basket and then watch that basket. RCA's first step was to buy out Marconi's American operation, keeping it under American control. RCA got a better deal than they realized. Marconi Company came with the self-assured, determined David Sarnoff.
He had vast self-confidence. He had the biggest ego of any man I've ever seen. It's hard to believe, but he once told me, he said, "I've never known fear." Now, that's, to me, is a remarkable statement, but he said it as though he really believed it.
Sarnoff would one day become the father of television, but first he would transform radio. At 22, Sarnoff outlined his vision for radio in a brief document known as the Radio Box Memo. Sarnoff envisioned a device in the home where people could receive music, news, and sports. The memo outlined an organized system of regular programming, 5 years before it happened. But Sarnoff's idea received a cool reception. The technical challenges hadn't yet been overcome, and even though it was possible to broadcast voice and music, why would anyone want to? While Sarnoff struggled to gain acceptance, Philo Farnsworth was still looking for a break in Salt Lake City. As with all great inventors, luck was about to play a fateful role. One of his bosses introduced Farnsworth to wealthy friends. Farnsworth's idea for television captivated them, and they agreed to finance his work. Farnsworth moved to Los Angeles where he could find necessary materials. The young inventor had to invent whole new tools just to proceed. He mixed chemicals, even blew the glass for his experimental tubes, all in utmost secrecy. He was concerned someone might steal the idea and file for precious patents. Farnsworth spent every waking moment trying to perfect his new invention. He confessed to his new bride, Penn, "There's another woman in my life, and her name is television." Farnsworth was close to creating a working television, but the clock was ticking. He wasn't the only inventor trying to solve the mystery. He had competition, respected scientists who were close at his heels. In the 1920s, America was dancing the Charleston. Prohibition was casting its dry shadow, and radio was the toast of the town. Young David Sarnoff's brilliance was rewarded with a lucrative position at RCA. But soon he had begun casting his visionary eye across the technological landscape. It came to rest on television. And Farnsworth now had company. Real scientists were getting into the race for television. One of them, a brilliant Russian immigrant named Vladimir Zworykin, had begun to figure out the puzzle of television at precisely the same time as Farnsworth. Remarkably, the two men's experiments were nearly identical in concept. Zworykin was quickly making a name for himself in an unlikely way.
One of his experiments blew up, and that's how his bosses first took notice of him. Zworykin always liked to push the edges in his experiments, which is part of the reason why he hit on the invention of television.
In 1925, after 5 years of hard work, Farnsworth was ready. He set up a demonstration guaranteed to thrill the public and capture the world's attention. Farnsworth invited the wildly popular Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks up from Los Angeles to be part of a demonstration in San Francisco. Unfortunately, things didn't go quite as planned.
Farnsworth had the demonstration all set up. It worked perfectly in rehearsal, and then when these super celebrities from Hollywood sat down, the whole thing didn't happen. The screen went blank, and the celebrities went back convinced, like the rest of the nation, that there was no future in television.
Farnsworth needed to produce results quickly. His failed demonstration worried his backers. The pressure was growing. Others were placing their bets on mechanical television. Mechanical television's great proponent was Charles Francis Jenkins. He was a highly respected inventor of the self-starting engine and the 35mm motion picture projector. Jenkins' fast work and flair for publicity put him out ahead of the pack very quickly. In a 1927 publicity coup, Jenkins unveiled the first long-distance television transmission in history. Jenkins convinced Herbert Hoover, then Secretary of Commerce, to take part in sending an intercity television image from Washington to New York. After first burning his forehead on the hot lights, a crude 48-line image appeared on the screen. The future president spoke for 2 minutes, followed by his wife. She was concerned the device not be used to read minds. Mechanical television had struck the first blow. But scientists took Farnsworth's work in electronic television seriously. England was becoming the first battleground to decide the future format of television. Philo Farnsworth. Both men were invited to demonstrate their competing systems. When the momentous day came, Baird showed his television first, to enthusiastic response. While Farnsworth began his demonstration in the next room, Baird was unprepared for what he saw next.
And out of the corner of his eye, he caught the Farnsworth image on a very large screen. And he just stopped mid-sentence and wandered away from the people he was talking to back into the open door to get a clearer look at this incredibly superior image that Farnsworth had produced. And Baird knew at that moment that he would just be a footnote in television history.
Philo Farnsworth was America's boy genius of television, but he had competition. The explosive and brilliant physicist Zworykin was every bit his equal. At Westinghouse, Zworykin's ideas fell on deaf ears, but his luck was about to change. Zworykin decided to pitch his idea to David Sarnoff at RCA, a meeting that would change the course of broadcasting history. Sarnoff had an intuitive understanding for the vast potential of television. In Zworykin, he found a technological soulmate, someone capable of making the idea a working reality. Soon, Zworykin began working for Sarnoff. Philo T. Farnsworth now had serious competition. Zworykin now had the megalith RCA behind him. Both men claimed they had invented television, and both men were right. Since Farnsworth and Zworykin had done their work concurrently, the patent courts would have to decide who had been first. The deciding factor was Farnsworth's high school science teacher. He had copied the drawings of the 14-year-old boy off a Utah blackboard. This was proof that Farnsworth's ideas had come first. Farnsworth got his patents. The small-town farm boy had taken on the giant corporation and won. RCA now needed Farnsworth's patents to further develop television. They tried to pressure Farnsworth to sell his new patents to RCA, but Farnsworth wanted continuous royalties. Sarnoff had never allowed such a thing. RCA had built their entire fortune on ownership of patents. Sarnoff did all he could to intimidate the 24-year-old inventor.
General Sarnoff had a very dominant type of personality. I've seen people absolutely terrorized by him. He often used to say, "I give ulcers." I don't get them.
Farnsworth wasn't intimidated. He held his ground under increasing pressure. For once, Sarnoff had met his match. Sarnoff gave in, and for several years, Farnsworth received royalties from RCA. Sarnoff now had control of the patents that would help him reach his dream of a television in every home. But events were about to show him just how daunting a challenge lay ahead.